An ancient black dragon rises from the swamp, rivulets of rancid water running down its impenetrable scales. My breath dissolves flesh from bone, it booms. My claws rend souls, and my bite is eternal. You were fools to trespass into my swamp, and now you shall suffer my wrath. Beg for mercy, mortals.
Okay, I stab it.
I attack it too.
I'm gonna tickle it under the chin.
I'll just finish my smoke first, if you don't mind.
You guys, come on! This is an ancient black dragon. This is no joke.
I got a good joke, but I don't want us to get demonetized.
So is the dragon ticklish or what?
I'm not kidding. This is an ancient black dragon. You should be taking this a little bit more seriously.
Well, perhaps we would if your boss battles weren't always so lame.
Welcome to the DM Lair. I'm Luke Hart, and I've been a Dungeon Master since high school. On this channel, I give practical Dungeon Master advice that you can implement at your game table. Okay, so last week we talked about mechanics you can use to spice up any boss fight, be it low levels, mid levels, or high levels. In this video, we're going to talk about how to make mid-level and high-level boss fights more fun for your players. When your players are between levels 5 and 12, I definitely consider using these mechanics. However, from levels 13 and on, you pretty much need to be doing these things if you don't want your bosses to be big wussy pushovers. And yes, by fun boss fights, I mean ones that are more tactically engaging and challenging than a surround and pound where your players basically just go into autopilot until the big bad is dead, because that sort of thing is usually pretty lame in my opinion. Now before we jump into it, I just want to let you know real quick that I've begun live streaming over on Twitch. If you want to be notified when I go live, remember to follow me over on Twitch. There's a link to my Twitch channel down in the description. I feel like I probably should say Twitch just a few more times. Now mostly I do 3 different types of streams. 1, collaborative creation streams where we create something together such as NPCs, monsters, traps, or even entire adventures. 2, question and answer hangouts where we just chat about D&D and I answer your Dungeon Master questions. And 3rd, I do miniature painting hangouts where we just chill and paint minis together. And if you miss a Twitch stream, I'll be uploading many of the live streams to my second YouTube channel, the DM Lair streams, where you can watch them at your leisure. Again, link in description. Anyway, enough of that. On to boss fights. The first basic thing that any mid to high level boss needs is legendary resistances. Trust me here, if your boss doesn't have legendary resistances, they are dead meat. All it takes is 1 failed saving throw against a spell like Hold Person, Hold Monster, or Tasha's Hideous Laughter to turn your awesome boss battle into a brutal surround and pound where they go down in 1 or 2 rounds. Before I started giving my bosses legendary resistance, many of my boss fights suffered from quick and violent endings. What was supposed to have been a climatic and dramatic encounter turned into a boring beatdown due to 1 failed saving throw. Now, many of the creatures that the designers considered to be boss monsters already have legendary resistances. However, if you want to use a creature as a boss that doesn't already have legendary resistances, just give them some. I wouldn't even worry about adjusting challenge ratings here either. It's not needed. And the CR system is so broken anyway, it's not worth the mathematical hassle. At mid-levels, just give your boss 1 or 2 legendary resistances. At higher levels, a boss should have 3. At epic levels, with level 20 PCs, I suggest 5 legendary resistances. The next thing any good boss should have is some gimmicks or special mechanics. That is, something that makes it special and makes the encounter a cut above the status quo. For instance, if I were to have a frost giant as a big bad, I would give it some special abilities. First, it can create a thick casing of ice over its skin, not only increasing its armor class, but creating an aura of cold damage. Anyone that starts their turn within 10 feet of the frost giant takes 2d6 cold damage, no save. Furthermore, if anyone attacks the frost giant from within 5 feet, they take piercing damage as shards of ice break off its skin and go flying about. However, the gimmick doesn't have to be special abilities. Imagine a necromancer in his lair, a giant cavern with bones strewn across the floor. Stone platforms float supernaturally in the air all about the chamber, with magical portals atop them. During the battle, the Necromancer uses the portals to teleport from one platform to another, making it difficult for characters to pin him down. Next, use waves of combatants and reinforcements. You see, once a battle breaks out, it probably only takes your players 1 or 2 rounds to figure the situation out and settle into a rhythm. It's your job to interrupt that rhythm and give them a new situation to resolve. Just as your players rush forward to confront the Frost Giant and start flinging spells at him, a door to the side opens, and a pack of winter wolves rush into the chamber. Since the fighter and barbarian are tied up with the Frost Giant Chieftain, the bard and wizard are dangerously unprotected. The winter wolves sense this and close in for the kill. And then, in round 4, the Frost Giant smashes a gem to the ground, summoning a massive ice elemental. With the elemental tying up the melee characters, the giant falls back to a rock pile and begins pelting the adventurers from afar. Not only does this sort of thing make the battle more interesting, but it also increases the challenge. So just be sure to account for that when planning the adventure. If you're interested in getting some really cool D&D t-shirts, hoodies, and other apparel, I highly recommend you check out Gorilla Tees. I've been wearing their shirts in my videos since January of 2018, and I even got this cool hat from them. There is a link in the description to their site, and if you use the promo code TheDMLair, you can get 15% off your purchase. Minions. What big bad doesn't have minions to help them out? And I'm not talking about just having other monsters fight by his side, but rather the 1 hit point version monsters that 4th edition introduced to the game. Basically, what I do here is find a monster whose challenge rating is significantly lower than the boss's and have them be minions. They only have 1 hit point, but are otherwise unchanged from the monster's normal stat block. Then I throw about half a dozen of them into the combat. Sometimes I even have more arrive at certain points in the battle. For instance, if I'm running an ancient white dragon, then I'll use a water weird, a CR3 creature, or a water elemental, a CR5 creature as a minion. Since it's a white dragon, I'll describe them as being mounds of animated snow and ice, and will intentionally avoid calling them by their real names. That contributes to the ambience and theme of the boss fight. Or take our Necromancer from earlier. The Necro will be up on the floating platforms hurling spells at the heroes. And down below, the bones filling the chamber are animating as skeletons that attack. At the beginning of every other round, I might have 1d6 more skeletons animate. That'll give the players something to think about. Next up on the list is legendary actions. The single biggest thing a big bad boss suffers from is a lack of action economy when compared to the players. This means that for every 1 thing the boss gets to do, the players get to do 4 to 6, depending on how many players there are and what special abilities they have that grant them extra actions. And when your boss is behind the curve with action economy, that's a swift path to a quick death. So definitely give your bosses legendary actions, especially once your players hit about level 12. This is going to allow them to match the number of actions your players can pump out in a round. And even if your boss already has minions, it probably still needs legendary actions. Now, I like to give a few normal things such as basic attacks and movement as legendary actions. However, it's also a good idea to think up something special the boss can do as a legendary action. For instance, your Necromancer might be able to radiate an aura of necrotic energy in a 10-foot radius that drains 1d6 hit points from creatures in that area of effect and transfers them to the Necromancer as temporary hit points. Now, a note about creatures that already have legendary actions. I suggest adding movement as an option. I've often noted in combats that bosses can lose a lot of their legendary actions due to poor positioning on the map. So I almost always allow them to move as a legendary action in addition to what their stat block says they can do. And then we have Lair actions. On initiative count 20, your big bad boss should be able to do something that manipulates the environment around him. Besides adding challenge, this makes things more interesting. A white dragon can create walls of ice that spring up and cut characters off from one another. The Necromancer can cause the bones on the floor to ripple in waves, knocking characters prone if they fail a saving throw. The Frost Giant slams its maul against the ground, causing shards of ice to fall from the ceiling, skewering players and creating difficult terrain. Alright, up next, extending hit points. That is, giving your big bad more hit points during the combat, depending on how quickly he's going down. Now, I have a feeling this is going to be a contentious topic, and how you feel about this really depends on whether or not you think the Dungeon Master should play it as it lies, or if they should cultivate the game experience on the fly. I fall on the side of cultivating the game experience on the fly, so I have no problem with this sort of thing. If I see that a boss, there's a bug on my face. If I see that a boss is going to drop in round 2 or 3, resulting in an anticlimactic encounter that the players will likely find disappointing, I give the creature more hit points. If you've played at higher levels, you know that PCs can easily put out nearly 100 hit points of damage around. Fighters, barbarians, and paladins routinely do this. And then you have spellcasters doing their thing. This can easily cause a boss with 300 plus hit points to drop in 1 or 2 rounds. So, when needed to prevent a boss battle from becoming completely lame and unchallenging, I extend hit points. Here's how I see it. If I, as the Dungeon Master, can customize the boss before the battle, give it special abilities, increase its hit points, etc., then how is it any different if I do those things during the battle? But here's the important part, Dungeon Masters. If you do this, make sure you're doing it for your players, not for yourself. That is, you do it to make the encounter more fun for them, not to beat the crap out of them and kill them all. I think at the crux of this issue is a very basic question for players out there. Do you trust your Dungeon Master? Do you trust them to extend hit points for your benefit to make the game more fun for you? Or do you think the DM will abuse this ability? If you trust your Dungeon Master, then you have nothing to worry about. However, if you don't, then I'd argue you have larger issues than the DM extending hit points. Now, I'm sure I just triggered a whole bunch of people, so you know the drill. Spew your vitriol down in the comments as usual. And next, we have another likely controversial suggestion. Account for the character's abilities. That is, when you design your boss fight, take into consideration what your players are able to do. This becomes especially important if your players' characters are min-maxed up the wazoo, or if the Dungeon Master showered them with powerful magic items like they were candy. Now, I am not suggesting that you counter and block everything they could possibly do. That would be a weighing rod DM move for sure. But if you know they all have boots of flying because you figure that would be a cool idea, then you dang well better make sure your big bad can contend with flying characters. For instance, characters that can fly would probably make short work of our Necromancer on his floating platforms. They'd bypass the skeletons down below, which can't fly, and home in on the Necromancer. So you need to make sure the Necromancer has some ability or gimmick that can account for that. Now, I'll be honest, there is a fine line to be drawn here. You can do this just a little bit, but certainly don't overdo it. Me personally, I avoid designing boss battles based on PC abilities in all but the most extreme cases. By the way, a quick note about adjusting challenge ratings when you use these techniques. I feel that most Dungeon Masters will agree that challenge ratings kind of suck and are very unreliable. So I use them as a rough guideline, but I certainly don't put too much faith in them. When I apply these mechanics to my boss fights, I may eyeball the challenge ratings of the encounter, but I certainly don't take the time to crunch the numbers to determine the exact challenge rating of the encounter. First, it's very time consuming, and second, it's not reliable anyway. So I just eyeball it, and then I rely on adjusting the encounter on the fly as it unfolds at my game table. Let me know down below what tips and tricks you've discovered for making awesome high-level boss fights. If you missed part 1 of how to create the perfect boss fight, click right here, and next week I'll tell you the story of Gary the Intern. So until next time, let's play D&D.